Okay, welcome to this Creativity with DBPRO. This video is based upon the 3D World Studio, an overview of its features. Today we're going to have a look at the lighting. But before we go into 3D World Studio, we're going to have a demonstration of how light mapping actually works. We're going to use Dark Shader as a learning aid. Dark Shader is one of the products that the TGC company has released for the purpose of creating shaders which enhance the appearance of objects and apply textures, multiple textures with lots of different cool effects, some of which you can see on the sports fiction WIP page and various other projects in the community. To demonstrate how light mapping works, we're going to borrow one of these handy shaders. We're going to use the detail shader, which mixes two textures together and blends them onto a single object. Now that's pretty similar to how light mapping works. Light maps are images of light and shadow applied to an object with its base texture added to the light map. Usually the light map exists on stage 0, which you can see right here, and the base texture is usually displayed using stage 1. However, it doesn't really matter. You could actually devise a system where it's the other way around, with the light map above the base texture. It's all in the mathematics used to blend the materials together. Here we see this is a shader. This shader adds a detailed texture to a color texture. With a light mapping environment, we would have a shader or a inbuilt function in the DBPRO engine which would use the light map and light up the base texture. To get this at the right scale, we'll use a scale of 1 for the detail, and we'll load a model. On the left hand side here we have all of our assets. We can use the supplier's assets or we can import our own. For this demonstration we use a cube, and that should load up in the scene. Ooh. Don't ask what that was about. Textures. Let's make sure the model loads up on the screen first. Now there are no textures applied, which is why the model is pretty much black, and we will load firstly our light map, which I've created here. Simply a gradient image with a few color blobs. So far we don't see anything. Next I'll add a color map. We use this one here, door 1, and here we have. Now we have the texture applied. We can see the door, and we have the light map or base, what this shader calls the base texture, but in light mapping it would be called something else, perhaps the light map, bitmap or something. And you can see here that we have the darkness at the bottom and the light at the top. So there would be no need for dynamic lights in the DBP and game environment. If we have light maps applied to the objects, then the object is displayed with what appears to be lighting without really affecting the performance of your game. So it's a pretty cool feature, which we're gonna play around with in 3D World Studio. And you can play around with the brightness settings and the amount of shadows that are created, and you can play around with the attenuation and all sorts of things. So we're going to go back into the 3D World Studio program. Okay, over to 3D World Studio. now create a floor. I'll increase the grid size. No need to be concerned about the thickness of the floor. Let us browse for a texture. The texture browser gives you the facility to locate and browse through your texture assets. I'm going to select one of, this is one I created using bevel effects in Photoshop. Okay, it's got a bit of a pattern on this one, but it'll be fine for this demonstration. Now we'll create a light source. To begin with, select the sports fiction entities option in the object category, or just plain entities in your installation, and the light should be selected by default, otherwise we select it in the object list. To begin, we'll create what's just called a light, which is actually a point light. Now I just clicked in the center there, but I had the X point under the mouse, so it selected the floor. Now I will drag, I'll press the right key on the keyboard to move right and zoom in a little bit. It's quite far out actually. What I'll do is I'll delete that and decrease the size of the floor. Increase the grid size a little bit to make it easier. Zoom in. Let's try that again. Decrease grid size. Place the lights. Okay. Place the light upward. Now we will have a look at the end result when we render the light map by pressing either this button here, render lights, or tools. You can render lights here, or as you can see here, as with all the other functions with shortcuts, the shortcut key is displayed to the right. In this case it's Control L. Here we have the render lights palette. If I click render, we will have the lights calculated with a progress bar, which can be closed now, and we can preview the lights without having to exit the program by clicking this button here, which is the texture plus lighting option for the current viewport. And here we can see 3D World Studio has applied to stage 0 on the object a light map. All the pixels close to the light source receive more of its light. The more intense the light, the brighter the effect. Parts far away from the light will remain dark. The darkness of the scene will be affected by the global ambience, which can be found in the render light panel. When you close 3D World Studio, a default ambient light setting will be restored, so every time you open the program you will need to set the ambient light again. It doesn't save with the map file as far as I can see. We're dragging on this capture, it doesn't look very good. Anyway, we can select a color here. Now by default it's a deep grey, that's the value of 64. You can leave this as it is if you want to use just the light sources to light the scene up, but this is a quick way of adding brightness to the parts of the scene that are not close to the light, which you'll see here. In fact, that hasn't really affected the scene. I haven't applied clear lights, render. There we go. Now we can see that the edges are slightly brighter, so if you need to add a daylight environment to your game, that's one way of creating the desirable daylight effect. lights is generally grey by default. However, you can change the color. The sunlight is usually orange, orangey yellow. So if we apply this now, notice the difference. Here we see the entire scene has an orange tone. I will change the color to a blue and see the result. Now we have a blue tone. If I decrease the light setting to a really dark, in fact no color, no tones, just black, let's see the result. Here we see a much darker effect where we can't even see the edges of the scene. So that covers the ambience setting. Let's set it back to its default, which is 64, 64, 64. We can adjust what kind of objects are affected by the light. In this scene, all we have are one brush, a cube, so that's being lit. We also can light meshes, which are added via the object category and object list, which you can import from your 3D program by saving it in the file path indicated in the options screen, which we discussed earlier, and terrain, which we'll discuss in the future. We can switch off the shadows. To demonstrate this, I'll create an object underneath the light. Well, I'm going to pick the box creation tool first. Now 3D Studio remembers the position of the previous object, so it placed it at the floor. Let's select constant lighting. Now it's slightly, I want the light to shine directly down without it being blocked, so we keep it right here and then we'll render the lights. We'll take a look. Here we see a shadow beneath the object. Sometimes we don't want to cast a shadow in a certain area. Perhaps you want to apply the shadow using the engine, using dark lights, or perhaps you want to have just something work as a functional object which just exists to call functions or triggers on a designated area. We can disable the shadow in two ways. We can tell the 3D Studio system to simply not draw shadows. As you can see here, the shadow has disappeared, although the scene is still light mapped. Another way, which is indicated, put shadows back on, in the help documentation, is to use a property. We can see here under lighting models that we can add a special key, which is cast brush shadows, and we can set it to 0. So let's do that. I'll set this up with cast brush shadows, and I'll set its value to 0. Apply. Now the shadows have been enabled, however the object still does not cast a shadow. If I remove the property or set it to 1, apply, close, and then render the scene, the object does cast a shadow. Okay, now it's time to work on a few other aspects of this scene. We will now create a few other objects. Create a box here. Make it tall. Decreases the grid size. I'll select a cylinder. Place it right here at the same height. 3D World Studio remembers the height of the previously selected object. I'll put one over here as well, and we will duplicate this box a few times and select some other texture. Control select. Let's see, something ordinary, please. Something ordinary. Okay, we'll go with that. Okay, apply. No need to worry about the size or anything. Now let's remove this box over here. We're going to adjust the, in fact we're going to split this floor up into a few pieces. We'll do that by using the slice plane. I'll break you here. Let's do it straight. And you here. And another piece here. I'll spread these. In fact, I'll just, oops, I've got to deselect the slicing plane, and then I'm going to duplicate some more of these columns and see the result. I'm going to cast some shadows in various parts of the floor and demonstrate something. Okay, now here's our light, and we've got the floor broken up into various pieces, and we're going to have a look at changing the quality of their light maps using properties. I'll raise the light up slightly, and I'll increase its range. I'll press the Shift and Enter key to bring up the properties panel, and then enter in something like 1200 units and increase the intensity, the brightness of the light slightly, 1.4, render the scene. Let's see what we've got here. We're going to need to space them out slightly. I'll lose a few. As you can see, the light map is still applied to the scene, even though I've removed the objects. It is just a texture applied to the floor. And what I'll do is I'll move the light slightly further away and increase its range a bit more. 1500 units. Render the scene. Okay. 3D World Studio has a Luxel size setting which we can use to adjust the resolution of the light map per object. To demonstrate this, I'll select each of the counterparts of the floor and enter into sub-object mode, the X key command on your keyboard. And here we see the Luxel size setting in this window here. We can use large Luxel sizes on large areas of floor, terrain and buildings, or we can use small settings to adjust the resolution for small objects. So use a large Luxel size for low quality and a small Luxel size for high quality. On this object here, we'll use a Luxel size of 32. On this here, we'll select the top face, then press Z, then press X to select all faces, and leave that at 16. This one here, we will do the same, ZX, and drop it to 8. And over here, we'll drop it to 4. So 8, 16, 32. Let's take a look at the result. And I'll make the shadows slightly darker. Render the scene. Brush area exceeds light map size, so we need to increase the light map size, the size of the texture used by the 3D World Studio to create the light maps. Still too small. Okay. Now, larger light maps take longer to render, and I am capturing video and audio, so the computer's doing a lot of work. So here we see that we've got more of a blur over here. This one's fuzzy, this one's very pixelated. This one over here is nice and smooth, but it's got a nice sharp edge. Interesting effect. Quite interesting difference. Okay, so that looks like we pretty much covered the Luxel feature. Now we'll work on this cylinder right over here. Enter into object mode, and let's zoom into it nice and close. Press F12. I'm going to reduce the grid size and slice this cylinder up. I'm going to have to select new objects that we need to slice for some reason. Okay, now we're gonna have a look at the border setting in the light mapping palette. Let's take a good shot of this now and then render. In fact, we'll remove the unwanted details from the map and take a look. Here we have the border size. I'll change it to 0 and render the scene. Stalling, come on. Okay, something on the hard drive is interrupting my activity here. Let's drop the resolution down and just for this video remove the floor for now. Let's try again, shall we? Border of 0. With this setting we see we have cylinder shape split into 4 parts, where we see the border of the vertices, the edges, very sharp. Let's have a look at the setting of 2. Here we see that the lighting is smooth. We'll take a look at the lighting entities themselves. We'll create a new document and enter into the 4-view layout and increase the grid size, zoom in a little bit, zoom in here, create a floor, enter the 3D view and select constant lighting and bring the floor down a little bit. I'll now create through it via the entities set list option and select a spotlight. As the name suggests, the spotlight will cast a ray in a cone shape at a given direction. By default, if you enter into properties by pressing shift and enter, the direction as shown here is cast downwards, the x-axis 90 degrees down. We can see the result when we render the scene. So our light source is just casting downwards. We can adjust the angle slightly. Let's say 75 degrees and see the result. Now the light is beaming to the left. Now there is no streams of light being cast. There's no feature that is available in this environment. To create such an effect, what I tend to do, which I'll not demonstrate in full here, I'll just show you a trick you can use in the DBPRO engine, and that is to use a cone object, place the cone beneath the light and and apply a shader to this object in the game engine so that it becomes semi-transparent, and then you can see a kind of beam being casted from the light source. There is also another type of light entity that 3D World Studio supplies, and that is the sunlight, which is an equivalent to a DarkBASIC professional directional light. Let's select our entity list option and select sunlight. Here I place the sunlight in the scene. We get an icon showing with the picture of the sun. We'll place it up. It doesn't really matter where you place it, you just position it at a location that's easy to find, usually in the center of the map as the coordinates 0, 0, 0. We can enter into properties and then simply type in an angle of the sunlight, and we can change the color by selecting the color option and picking the color. We'll select an orangey yellow color. All the key values are self-explanatory. The intensity simply affects how much the sunlight affects the scene. So let's take a look at the result. Now the sun is giving you a kind of ambience. And let's get rid of this cone and render the light scene again. The sunlight is affecting the ambience of the scene. Let's change the color of the light, the sun, to something weird, kind of magenta color. Let's see the result. There we have it. And if I place a cylinder or a tall object in the scene right here, anywhere will do, move it away from the spotlight, we should see a shadow. There we go. Cast from the origin of the sunlight, which is not where the sunlight is actually placed, but based upon the angle of the light source. This is a global light source. This can be used to light up the exterior. It won't affect the interior. As you can see here, this could have been covered over by a roof and we could have cast shadows down. We can use the global ambience in the light setting scene to adjust the overall brightness of the inner and outer parts of your maps. So I think that covers the light mapping in general. Just one last note: with all of the 3D Studio entities, you can adjust their settings using the properties window. You've got the color, the intensity, the range, and the fall off. The fall off affects how far the light source will affect the scene. So with the default setting with linear fall off on, the attenuation is using a linear pattern. To demonstrate this, I'll place the point light in the middle of the scene, drag the scene over here, raise it up a little bit, press the arrow keys to pan the view and drag this in the middle. Now, as it stands, we are rendering in a linear light pattern, so the difference is that from this point here, the intensity is at its maximum. From the distance setting or the range in the properties, anything that exceeds the range will not receive the intensity, and we have a linear interpolation between the center point of the light. Now if we turn it off, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is no interpolation or fall off activated. Actually, by turning linear fall off on, we turn on the inverse square fall off, which will kind of maintain its intensity as it goes out to its range setting, which is currently 800, and as it reaches the end of its range, it fades out quite a lot. It fades out almost to black, as we can see. In fact, we're going to have to decrease the range slightly to see the result of this particular fall off setting. Hopefully I've got it right this time. Here we see it's almost like a spotlight, but it will affect scenes placed around and above the light source, and we have the intensity maintained at a high curve, and then it curves down right at the end of the range. The inverse fall off is a lot more natural than the linear fall off, because as you turn, in real life, when you look at a light bulb and you see how it casts its light, you see that the range of light doesn't fall off in a straight pattern, as is the case with the linear fall off. However, the linear fall off is easier to work with because we can blend various lights and have them blend into various themes, various colors, a bit like how in a paint program you have a brush which can have its hardness changed. The hardness of the brush makes it more difficult to blend in with other brushes. However, with a soft brush we can enable a smoother blend, as is the case with the linear fall-off setting. We can have a smooth transition between two different colors. With linear fall-off off, we get this result. Which isn't too bad, but I don't think you'll be able to see what I can see because of the capture limitations I have at the moment, but you can detect that the blue area, the curve is carrying over. It's not blending in as well as the linear option. However, it depends on your taste and the kind of emotions you're trying to create in your scene. So that covers the lighting aspect of 3D Studio. Please post any questions or any requests in the forums or on my site, or just email me any questions you have regarding the lighting system.